We have already learned how to write an equation that is parallel to a given equation or given graph, and today we're going to be concentrating on perpendicular. I can write a linear function that is, yes, it says parallel or perpendicular, but once again, our focus today are going to be perpendicular lines. Perpendicular lines, lines that intersect to form right angles. Note, if the slope of two equations is the negative reciprocal, the lines are perpendicular. So we found out when we were working with parallel lines that if the slope was the same, then the lines were parallel. Now we're talking about something completely different. We're saying that if the lines are negative reciprocal, we're going to have to identify that because that's not going to be the same. Let's fill in some blanks here. The product of two numbers is -1 if one number is the negative reciprocal of the other. Let's back up just a little bit. When we talk about the reciprocal of a number, the true definition of reciprocal is the number that you multiply by the given number to have a product of 1. So in other words, if we were, I'm just going to write down here, the reciprocal of 1 over 2 is 2 over 1. And the reason that is because the product or answer to this multiplication problem is 1. So when we say reciprocal, we always talk about flipping the numbers, but really the mathematical definition is whatever you multiply by the given number to get a product of 1. All right, so keep that in mind. But doesn't say reciprocal, it says negative reciprocal. So instead of multiplying by a given number to get a product of 1, we are going to multiply by a given number to get a product of -1. So how is that going to work? Well, the reciprocal, it says find the reciprocal of -3/4. So just the reciprocal of -3/4. If it starts with a negative, then of course the reciprocal is also going to be negative. So all I really have to do is to flip those numbers. So the negative reciprocal of -3/4 is -4/3. Now it says write the negative reciprocal. So we're talking about of the original number. So if the reciprocal of -3/4 is -4/3, then the negative reciprocal is going to be the opposite of -4/3 or +4/3. And let's think about that for a minute. If I multiplied -3/4 times -4/3, then I would have got a product of 1. But if I multiply -3/4 times 4/3, now I'm going to get a product of -1. Mission accomplished. We were looking for the negative reciprocal. Find the reciprocal of 7. The reciprocal of 7, well, in order to find the reciprocal, I need two numbers. Well, really, 7 is 7 over 1. That is not the reciprocal. The reciprocal would be 1 over 7. That means the negative reciprocal is going to be the opposite of 1/7 or -1 over 7. So in other words, we're going to take whatever the given number was. So if I start with a negative, then the negative reciprocal is going to be positive. If I start with a positive, then the negative reciprocal, then my friends, is going to be a negative. Are the graphs of y is equal to -2x minus 1 and 4x minus 2y equals 6 perpendicular? So when we were working with parallel lines, we knew that if we found the slope and the slope is the same, then the lines are parallel. Well, in this example, I can't tell. I can't tell by looking at 4x minus 2y is equal to 6. So I have to put it in slope-intercept form just like the original equation. So let's go ahead and do that. In order to put it in slope-intercept form, we're solving for y. So we're going to isolate -2y or get that by itself. To do that, I need to subtract 4x on both sides of the equation. So I have -2y is equal to, I'm going to go ahead and move my -4x to the front of the equation, and then that's a +6. Now I just want to divide through, find -2 or the coefficient to get y by itself. A -4 divided by a -2 gives me a +2x, and then 6 divided by -2 gives me a -3. So the first thing that we do is just put it in slope-intercept form. The But then I have to identify the slope. So the slope is 2. Remember our original equation, the slope is -2. So the question is 2 the negative reciprocal of -2? If I was just writing the negative reciprocal of my original equation, which is -2, -2, the reciprocal of that would be -1/2. The negative reciprocal would have to be 1/2. So these lines, no, they are not perpendicular. Always think about if I multiply the slopes together, then I should get a -1. And -2 times 2, well, that's going to be a -4. So that there's no way that those are perpendicular. If I multiply -2 times 1/2, then that would be equal to -1. So that's another way to think about it. Are the graphs of y is equal to 7x plus 1 and y is equal to -1/7 x minus 6, are those perpendicular? So the question is, my slope here is 7. My slope in this equation is -1/7. How nice, they're already in slope-intercept form. If I multiply 7 times -1/7, do I end up with -1? Ding, ding, ding. Yes, they are perpendicular. Moving on to our next example. Write an equation for the line that contains 5, -2, and is perpendicular to y is equal to 5/2 x minus 4. Step 1, I need to know the slope of this equation. It is already in slope-intercept form, so I can easily identify 5/2. That's the slope. Well, the negative reciprocal, I'm going to go ahead and write that because that's the information I need, of 5/2 is going to be -2/5. So a couple of minutes ago, I told you if the slope starts out positive, then it's going to end up negative, and then also I need to flip-flop those numbers. So the slope of perpendicular lines is -2/5. And I want to talk to you just a little bit before we go into this. Perpendicular lines, they're going to be traveling at an opposite rate. So perpendicular, just in case you don't know this, that's going to make, they're going to intersect at 90-degree angles. So if I think about it, this line, let's say this line is traveling at a rate of up 5/2. Well, this line is going to be going down 2/5, and they would, in fact, make a perpendicular line. All right, so just like in parallel lines, we're going to use the same equation, our more familiar formula, point slope. We've been working with that for a little bit now. So y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1. I'm going to go ahead and label my points, x1, y1. And then I have to come back and substitute in my negative reciprocal for m. I know that my y term is -2. Go ahead and put that in parentheses, is equal to -2/5, times x minus, and then my value of x is 5. We're not quite in point slope because I've got this negative, negative. I'm just going to clean that up a little bit and then just leave it like this for a second. And we're going to call that point slope form. So I want to make sure we know exactly what that looks like. From here, I want to get y by itself because our goal is to change it into slope-intercept to finalize our answer. To do that, I have to distribute the -2/5 to both terms. Y plus 2 is equal to -2/5 x. -2/5 times -5 is going to give me a +2. And then one more step to get y by itself. I want to subtract 2 from both sides of the equation. Y is equal to -2/5 x. because my 2's are going to cancel, which really just tells us that if I was going to graph this equation, then this equation would go through the origin at 0.00 because our y-intercept is 0. So that, of course, is in slope-intercept form. So depending on what the directions tell you to do, if the directions say to write the equation in point slope, then you know that you can stop at this point. But if it says to write it in slope intercept, then you do need to use the distributive property to break it down into slope intercept form answer. Alrighty, moving on. Write an equation of the line that contains -6, -3, and is perpendicular to y is equal to -1/3 x plus 7. I know that I'm going to need an m term. My m term is -1/3, but that would be if the lines are parallel. We are not looking for parallel lines. We are looking for perpendicular lines. So the opposite of -1/3, if I start with a negative, then my slope for perpendicular is going to be positive, and I need to flip-flop that. So the slope then would just be a +3 for a perpendicular line. As far as my point slope equation, y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. I know you're probably getting sick of writing the formula. However, the more you write it, there's no chance that you're going to forget it on it in a test situation. So we just want to be thorough. My y term is a -3. Remember that the formula calls to subtract, so keep that subtraction, but then substitute in -3 for y. My m value is 3. X minus, and then my x1 value is a -6. This officially now is point slope form. The next step is to distribute. Distribute the 3 to both terms. Get y by itself. And then that is our final answer, slope-intercept. So now we have an equation that is perpendicular to our original equation and would have the point -6, -3, as the line would run through that point. How does that work? Well, if you could go back and substitute in, -3 is equal to 3 times -6 plus 15. So that means -18 plus 15 is equal to -3. And that, of course, checks. You don't have to check it, but that's what we just did, was write an equation where that point would go through the line. That point would be a point on the line. All right, so I am going to let you work in just a minute, but we can see right away I cannot pick out the slope in this equation. It's in standard form. Ax plus by is equal to c. So in order to get there, we're going to backtrack just a tad. And by backtracking, I mean get y by itself. So in order to do that, I want to subtract x on both sides of the equation. 3y is equal to -x minus 9. Divide through by 3 on both sides of the equation. And I know that this number here is a 1, so that's -1/3 x. And then negative divided by a positive is going to give me a -3. Now that I have the equation in slope-intercept form, I can pick out the slope. Before you do anything else, I would stop yourself and say, am I writing a line that's parallel or am I writing a line that's perpendicular? If it's parallel, bam, we're done. It's -1/3. However, this tells us to write a perpendicular line, so we need to change it. The negative reciprocal of -1/3 would be a +3. Just like before, right? Yep. All right, so now I want you to pause the video and I want you to go ahead and finish up this problem. When you're finished, then go ahead and start the video so you can check your work. So welcome back. You probably already figured out the formula. Now it's officially in point slope form. Now we want to get rid of the parentheses. You probably already figured that out. And then to get y by itself, we'll add 4 to both sides of the equation. Y is equal to 3x plus 7. Today you have learned how to write an equation that is perpendicular to the given equation.